All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. I'm going to talk to Mike Bown again today, world's most traveled man. We're going to talk about all kinds of exciting topics like grenade fishing, which you were telling me about recently, and
Right.
uh, and also many other topics, um, such as billionaire addicts, because you told me a few stories about billionaires that have drug problems, and
Yeah, they all.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, and and then also what you were telling me about a while ago, about something about Arab history that I didn't know about, and then also the progression of technology, which you always keep me up to date on too. So yeah,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, that sounds great.
you want to kind of introduce yourself to people who don't know you first?
Okay, I'm Mike Spencer Bown. Basically, I backpack all the time. So I'm 50 now, and I've been backpacking for 30 years nonstop. So I
Yeah,
usually don't. I've been a long time in Canada now. I popped down to California and back, but usually I'm in whatever random country. I'm sort of have to be here for like family reasons and stuff. A lot of health problems with my family.
yeah,
I'm helping out a little bit now. But yeah, usually I just backpack around, talk to interesting people, and that's my lifestyle. Maybe I work like 1 month a year to try to scrape up some cash.
wish I could do that.
I'm kind of like a vagabond traveling.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. Yeah, but the science news has been especially exciting lately. I was talking to you a few times over Messenger about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, I was telling you about that. So a few months ago, if you had said that you were a multi-billionaire and you wanted to live forever as a robot, and you asked me, do I know anyone that could do that for you? I'd have to tell you, no, it's impossible because nobody has that technology. Nobody has even enough money to pay for that technology. But as of about a month and a half ago, someone figured out a way to do it.
Yeah. Explain how they found, like, what that was again. It was something about how they had a big breakthrough, and it's a lot it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper to be able to do that now. And like you were saying, it wasn't
Yeah, exactly.
possible before, and now
It,
it
it was
is.
it was possible in a sense where you would have had to take. Okay, let's say you wanted your brain uploaded to a robot or to the internet. First of all, someone would have to slice out your brain. Hopefully, it should be fresh. And then you'd have to use an electron microscope to look at each bit of the brain to get up the information of all the synapses, the nerve types, all that. There's so many nerves. There's like 86 billion nerves, and they have thousands of synapses each in some cases, or hundreds up to 10,000. So you can imagine the detail they have to look at. You'd have to slowly go through an electron microscope. And the problem is you need thousands of electron microscopes, thousands of crews doing it, and it would take you probably 1,000 years. So it's just
Right.
not feasible.
Yeah.
But then
Right.
someone found out something very clever. So it involves the squishy stuff that you get when in potting soil. It's like a jelly or a goo, and when water comes in it, it really expands, so it goes to 50 times its normal size. So you see that sometimes in potting soil. You can like buy at the garden center. But someone's idea was they would take your fresh brain, they would inject into it various kinds of fluorescent dyes, and these would sprinkle and kind of stick everywhere to all the synapses and the nerves. So it's almost like the way a Christmas tree is dotted with lights everywhere. And then they would stick in this ooze, which this gel that can expand, and it would go everywhere in the brain. And they put a detergent in the gel that would dissolve all the organic matter. So what you're left with is a brain that's now a clear jelly, and everywhere is all these little sprinkling little fluorescent tags that show almost the way as if you removed the Christmas tree, but its lights were still there. Oh, are you still there? Oh, it
Mike
seems like
there.
you've cut out. Oh,
Oh,
there you
there
are.
you are. There you are. I
Okay,
lost you
yeah.
for a sec. There you
Yeah,
are.
it disappeared for a second. Okay, so imagine if you could take a Christmas tree and the Christmas tree disappeared, but the lights are still there. You could still see where all the branches are and everything else. So with this
Okay.
technique now, you have a jelly brain, and it has a lot of these fluorescent tags in it. Now you put it in water, and it absorbs the water, and it gets 50 times bigger. And now you've
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and now you've expanded it so much that you can take slices of it, and you can use a regular, though expensive. I was talking to Ladan about this, who you know from probably you know him in person. Yeah, you
Yeah.
probably met him or talked to him at least.
Yeah,
Anyway, he
he's
was
been
telling
on
me
here a few times too.
Okay, cool. So he was telling
Yeah.
me that I was thinking it was a cheap light microscope, and he was telling me, no, 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 those things are 600 grand a pop. But still, it's a very good high-end light microscope, and it's much faster than an electron microscope. So
Oh,
now,
okay.
together with him, we tried to calculate how long it would take you using this new technique. So you got it can do 10 fly brains a day. And so I did the mathematical calculation of how many fly brains equivalent to a human brain is. And it looks like you could finish it in a reasonable time, like let's say 10 years. And it would only cost
Right.
you 300 million.
Yeah, that's way cheaper than, like you said, it would cost billions before.
Trillions probably, or maybe
Trillions.
Google.
Oh,
'Cause you'd have to
wow.
hire thousands of electron microscope crews to work for 500 years or 1,000 years.
Right. So yeah, that's a huge fucking breakthrough. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Now, of
Yeah.
course, this is just what they have in the lab. So you imagine if they really wanted to speed it up, they could work on it and speed it up. And I wouldn't be surprised if they can eventually get it down to a few $1 million to get your brain in this form where it's uploaded. And I think the only way you could store it is probably in a zircon crystal
What's
as a
that?
hologram. Because you want a very durable crystal, and you could probably store it there as a hologram, and then you'd have access to your brain. Now, I'm not
That's so
suggesting that anyone
cool.
would do this. I mean, it would be kind of crazy. Because I think
Yeah.
you'd have that problem, almost with RoboCop, where they tried to stick the guy's brain in the robot at first, and the guy like cuts his own head off.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I don't think I wouldn't want to be some sort of robot, so
Yeah.
or even just generally on the computer. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
other downsides to it. So I don't recommend it. But if you were someone who's quite wealthy, you might want to do something like that. I'd find it amusing anyway, but
Yeah.
not for me.
Yeah, there are lots of like science fiction stories about, people uploading their brains into a digital form and then them technically being able to live forever by being able to endlessly replicate your brain and stuff like that. And then there's always the philosophical discussion of whether that's actually replicating yourself or whether it's something completely different. And then it always seems like in the science fiction stories that it always seems to go wrong.
Yeah, well, I think I can't guess where it would go wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if it went wrong somewhere. But it would be interesting. Like, here's one way it could go wrong. So let's say you're like, okay, I've spent millions. Now I put myself on the internet. I'm like a zircon crystal connected to the internet. Now I can live forever. Well, it could be someone is trying to make like a sex robot for like a gay porn brothel. And they're like, oh, we don't have a brain for this sex robot. Oh, look, this idiot uploaded his brain to the internet. Yoink, we'll just take that. And they like stick them in the robots they're making. And you're like, oh no, like that would be your doom, right? You're like, oh my
Oh
gosh, I
yeah.
didn't do that, right?
Oh, that would be terrible.
Yeah, so there can be downsides. Like I would never go for it myself. But that Ray Kurzweil guy, if I'm saying his name right, I think
Yeah.
he wants to do it, and probably.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised. It's kind of neat to see something that's totally science fiction. Like this is like Star Trek type science fiction, really. And it's
Yeah.
kind of neat to see that just couple months ago, someone figured out a way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll be really interesting to see what happens with developments to do with this in the future. Like yeah, it's really fascinating to think about.
There was another pretty cool thing happening with a little bit involving the brain. So I might have been talking to you about this a little while ago that they're using algebraic geometry when they're studying what's happening within the cortex.
So
So
what exactly is algebraic geometry, first of all?
it's a way to do mathematics involving simulated multiple dimensions, like dimensions beyond the usual number of dimensions. So let's say you
Okay.
want to go to 10 dimensions, which is quite popular for string theory. You could be
Right.
using algebraic geometry. And if you want
Okay.
to work with conformal field theories, it would be that sort of thing. So you've got like very strange, multi-dimensional geometries that you're working with. And especially if you're trying to work with something that's in phase transition, then you'd want to do that. And a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I was interested where I heard that Dr. Markram guy who's doing the IBM brain analysis. He was claiming that he was finding dimensionality of up to 10 or even 11
Oh.
in the cortexes that he was trying to model and study in rat cortexes.
Oh wow.
And this kind of struck me as interesting because people who work in conformal field theory, like ones that you'd use for trying to do quantum gravity or understand the universe. They also are interested in 10 or 11 dimensions, because this is where all the string theories seem to come together, and their magic goes on. I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Then I remember this guy called Dr. Bach. He's dead now. He died quite early. But he had an interesting idea where he was saying the brain is probably poised at a phase transition. So he was using the example of a pile of sand when you drop little bits of sand. And at a certain point, it begins to cascade. And then it kind of stops. And then it sort of builds up again and cascades. And the mathematics of that sand pile is it's in phase transition right before the extra piece of sand comes that actually causes the cascade, like the little avalanche down the side. And he was saying that's the way the brain seems to work. And if that were true, like if the brain's really in phase transition like that, which there seemed to be some further evidence to show that perhaps he's right about that. Well, if this is true, and also if conformal field theory, like multiple dimensions, as Dr. Markham was talking about, if you put those two together, then you end up having a brain that's actually quite similar to the theories about the universe. So I kind of had this in the back of my mind, that the theories like how the universe works at the deepest level and how the brain works at the deepest level seem to be connected. And it's almost like the brain's like a little mini universe in a way, or like the flesh that's in there is simulating a little mini universe.
Oh yeah, that's been a popular philosophical position for a long time too, right? Like the brain is an aspect of like the brain is in a way an aspect of the universe, and I mean, it is interesting. It would be really interesting if that's like if the brain is similar to the universe in that way. You said like the brain and the universe. It would mean that the brain and the universe both work as a combination of conformal field theory
Yeah.
rather, and phase transition.
Yeah. And then but then I was looking through Arvik's papers, which are like the preprints for stuff that was.
Oh yeah, you sent me I think one or two of those.
Yeah. So there was a guy who was, there's actually a guy who's, I think he's from Czech Republic or something. And he's a bit of a jerk. Like he's a real troll online, but he's also a brilliant physicist. And he was making a list of, interesting Arvik's papers. And I thought, okay, well, he's one of the only guys who blogs about this stuff, so I'll check some of them out. And one of the ones that he recommended as the most interesting of the year or the month or whatever his list was, it turned out it was this one where people are studying how at the edge of the universe, where different equations are being calculated that send in the reflections that make the lower dimensional hologram that we live in. So you know how that Argentinian physicist was saying we're living in a hologram projected from the outer expanding shell of the universe. Well, he was looking at the way the laws of the universe are combined in order to be sent in here as a hologram so that we can live as our holographic existence. And he found that you need to use deep learning and neural net mathematics to describe how the laws are implemented. And the sort of kind of deep learning that he needs to use is conformal field theory.
Oh, okay. So that's more of that evidence that you mentioned earlier that suggests this kind of similarity between how the brain and how the universe might work. And that also, you also just answered my question that I had in my head about how it would be possible for a hologram to be reflected from the edge of the universe. It would be through conformal field theory.
Yeah, it involves that, and then there's some other equation involving symmetry, and it's like it's actually similar to a really deep branch of mathematics. That that Indian mathematician, I can never pronounce his name because it's really long and it's very Hindu, but he was like 100 years ago, a really long time ago, and he was just like some poor Indian guy, but he was sending letters to the I think the Royal Society in Great Britain at the time when Great Britain was colonialist. And some guy brought him over, and he had these really amazing insights into the deepest parts of mathematics. And he claimed that a Hindu goddess came to him in dreams and gave them to him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they were the sort of weird thing that have to do with those like Escher pictures, like the sort of geometry having to do with Escher. And this same type of geometry is the type of mathematics that seems to be the one that sort of modulates how the hologram is projected to create our universe. So he thought it was coming from a Hindu goddess, but maybe it was coming from deep in his own mind, if there really is such a similarity between the universe and the mind. Right. But in a sense, that is kind of Hindu, right? So maybe it was from a Hindu goddess.
Yeah. It's interesting, like how much of this like you were saying, like I was saying earlier, how much of this can sound like what philosophers have been talking about for a long time rather, and like you were saying, how a lot of different religions and mythologies can have this perspective too, like especially Hinduism, like you mentioned. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so maybe they were onto something. I think that, the next 50 years, if we live to see it, it'd be interesting to see if they find that there's some sort of, or you can find like the myths and the old religions to see if they can sort of meld up with what's happening in science.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it'll be really interesting to see what direction that goes. I mean, it could go that way, it could go the opposite way that some people predict. It could go some sort somewhere in between both of those, or it could be something completely different that we've never
And it could be
anticipated
it could be a
before.
screw up too. So
Yeah,
Einstein could be a screw up. I'm not
yeah,
going to say it necessarily is, but it could be this kind of screw up. So physicists are trying really, really hard to understand the universe, but they don't have much data. So they're kind of just looking at what looks beautiful, what seems good to them. And in the end, they make something like string theory. Well, what if string theory is how the brain works? But what if the universe works in a different way?
oh yeah,
So really, they were just, what they ended up with was not a theory of the universe, but only their own brain.
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's almost like they were navel gazing. But
yeah,
I'm just saying that's true. I mean, especially this evidence that you need deep learning and neural net to understand the laws of the universe would seem to mitigate against that. But it could be that perhaps our physicists have gone off and sort of like gone around and sort of got into their own heads.
yeah. I mean, that has happened many times before in the history of science and especially physics too, right? Like people think they have the theory of the correct mathematics of how everything works, like the whole universe and stuff like that, and then they found out that it's more complicated, like how there has to be, I forget which one it is. I think it was that string theory came out of the fact that you need a different form of math. I think it's Einstein's general relativity to calculate the size of larger interstellar objects like planets, but you need quantum mechanics to do the same thing with smaller things like microscopic particles and something like that.
Yeah, and so they wanted to join them with a quantum theory of gravity. And
Right.
what attracted them to string theory was that string theory has a graviton in it. So string theory has naturally appearing a particle of gravity. They really wanted to see one. But like Eric Weinstein thinks that maybe they're on a wild goose chase. So he's not impressed because their progress recently has not been as fast as it used to be.
Oh yeah, I saw him talking about that on a video I watched recently where he was talking about string theory, and he was talking about how they might have just been wasting their time the whole time.
Yeah, so they might have been, but I don't know. I mean, the thing is with string theory, it might be good for something even if it doesn't explain what people thought it would explain. Because for instance, people who are working on magnets found that it's actually pretty good for figuring out magnets. So you never know. The universe is so weird and wonderful that I wouldn't say that it's useless yet. In fact, it might be everything. Maybe it'll explain the mind of the universe. Maybe it'll only explain magnets. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, even if it's only for magnets, like you said, that's still a benefit. Obviously, a much smaller benefit than it would have been otherwise, but still a benefit.
Yeah, because the magnet guys have been sitting in on the string theory lectures recently. Because like 3 or 4 years ago, they've been kind of stuck in how to understand magnets. And then some of them realized that the equation looked a lot like string theory, and they sat in on the string theory stuff, and they said, "Holy shit, it's string theory stuff." So they're using it now for their magnet understanding.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had no idea about that. So, like, that means that string theory, does that mean that the math of string theory is related to the math of electromagnetism?
Yeah, because there's something called the Isling. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing Isling or Isling model, and it's a model of a certain kind of magnet. And that's where the people first came about discussing conformal theories. So sort
Oh,
of like they
okay.
kind of went through magnets on their way there, and they kind of just bypassed magnets and thought there's not much to them. But it turns out maybe magnets have this situation too, where they're kind of, at a phase transition, and the geometry can explain them because they have this concept in magnets that as you zoom in or out, you find these domains, that are self-similar, so they're almost fractal. So you're looking at
Oh,
domains at a certain size, and as you zoom in and out, you're seeing a similar shapes, and that's probably why
oh,
it's conformal.
oh, okay. That's interesting too, because the like part of the issue with string theory, I think, like you were saying, is this this idea of quantum gravity, and like that part of the reason that string theory emerged because of that, like the problem with merging those two different types of math was gravity, because gravity was the hardest part to figure.
Oops, cut out again. Hmm. Are you still there? It's just a still of your head. Oh, you're back on?
Oh,
Hello. I don't know why
oh
it kicked
yeah,
you
I'm
out.
back. Oh, I got kicked out there.
Oh,
Oh, I'm
weird.
glad it. I'm glad I got back on there though. When did I get kicked out there? Did you hear me finish asking my question?
No, I didn't. I'm gonna see if maybe it's on this end. I'm gonna try to open up a door here.
Okay.
I don't know
No,
if maybe there was some.
I think my Wi-Fi just shut itself off randomly for a minute.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so re-ask the question, and I'll.
So I was talking about how the four main forces in the universe are gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that string theory has sort of shifted targets from the sounds of what you're saying anyway, from focusing on gravity to focusing on electromagnetism, perhaps. And I was wondering if it's possible that the focus might shift to the strong or weak nuclear forces in the future if they find out that they made that mistake again, or maybe they've already eliminated that possibility with the nuclear bomb or something like that. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I know they're finding that symmetry is at the deepest level of all this. So they're
Oh,
talking
okay.
about different kinds of symmetry, and these forces and even the way the particles are expressed are their the underlying laws have to do with symmetry.
Aren't there like
And
two kind of competing camps in physics? I remember that seeing this on a documentary about that particle accelerator in Switzerland, I think it is, the biggest one in the world. The Large Hadron Collider, that's what it is.
oh yeah, well, probably
About
the biggest camps are the string theory guys, and then you have the loop quantum gravity guys.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say I thought I remembered in that documentary that it was supersymmetry versus string theory, but I have heard like more recently Lawrence Krauss talking about loop quantum gravity as being a better alternative to string theory too.
Yeah, because string theory it requires the supersymmetry,
Oh, okay.
and we haven't found any evidence of these supersymmetrical particles that they claim have to be there.
Okay.
Yes, that's kind of a problem for it. But for the for things like supersymmetry or things like string theory, they are interested in these symmetries, and it could be there's where the connection to the brain might come in because the brain, when it's trying to organize information, is trying to compress it and store it in a way that you can use it. And I think looking for symmetries is probably a lot of what the cortex is doing. If you're looking for
Oh,
symmetries,
okay.
you're looking for what's any kind of deeper information within what's otherwise. Imagine just the senses coming in, through your vision or your hearing, or whatever. It's like a whole bunch of data. Then you might have to look through different kinds of symmetries to get an idea of what the shape of it is.
Oh,
The
okay.
reality.
Yeah, I think we were talking before about how maybe that's like how pattern recognition works, which
Yeah,
our
it could be
brains are
like
supposed
that.
to be so good at, right?
Yeah, and then I was speculating that maybe a thought might be something like a bootstrap, because when you're trying to find symmetry conditions inside of conformal field theory that involves multiple dimensions, you use a technique called bootstrapping. So it could be that our thoughts are actually bootstraps.
And what exactly is bootstrapping again?
I could send you an article on it. It's a little bit
Yeah.
complicated, but it's a way to find coefficients that extremely efficiently represent the symmetries inside of a data set, as long as that data set is coming from a situation where it's, I guess you'd have to say whether it's a conformal one, so something like a magnet or something like what the universe might be like. So it has to be the
Oh,
kind of
okay.
data set that's useful for it. So it has to be something where it can't make the bootstrapping unless it's at a phase transition, and it has to be multidimensional. And if that's the case, it's able
Oh,
to extract the symmetries from a data set.
so it wouldn't be doing that if it were not in a phase transition and if it were not multidimensional.
Yeah, so then someone like Dr. Bach, the late Dr. Bach, he might say that's why the brain is in a phase transition. So that it can, and also that Dr. Wolfram might say, well, that's why the brain's calculating in simulated higher dimensions. So it's meeting the conditions to be able to use a bootstrap to extract coefficients that very succinctly represent the symmetries coming into the data that's flowing into the brain.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it combines a lot of different really complex sounding aspects. And I remember you were telling me before about some of these speculations you had and how um, you floated them to people like Ladin and people he knows who work on these things, but they wanted you to present the math, and the math
Yeah.
is so
And I'm
complex
like,
that you
sorry, I
can't
haven't
do.
done math in like 30 years.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and then when I looked at the math in that Arvix thing, the math for deep learning, I was like, holy, that's a lot of math.
yeah,
I don't know if you
yeah,
looked at some of his equations, but I didn't want to delve into that. It's
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we were talking about before that math has never been my strong suit. I've gotten better at it more in recent years, but I'm still, yeah, I wouldn't even want to enter into all of that math involved that you're talking about.
Yeah, I've got worse at it. And one thing with this math as well is you really got to be on top of your game to be doing the advanced math. That's really the cutting edge stuff. So if you're
Oh
even
yeah.
like some guys who were professional physicists their whole life, if oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I just turned off
Okay.
my camera for a minute.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were one of these professional physicists and you're out of the field, let's say you take like a 3 year break, you come back and you're like, oh no, I don't understand what's going on anymore because it advances so
Oh.
quick and it's so complicated.
Oh wow. I didn't realize it advances that quickly.
Yeah, it's really, really a tough, like it's a mind bending area to work. You're really using your brain hard. Yeah, and for other things, it's less so, like writing and things like that. But it's
Yeah.
cool stuff though. I like to follow it and see what's going on. Have you been paying attention to what's going on in uh, kind of like paleo DNA and study of
No.
like ancient tribes? Okay, there's a lot of really cool stuff. So, are you have you ever studied the history of the Yamnaya?
No.
No. Okay, cool. So I'll be able to tell you a really interesting tale then. So there were these people that were living near Lake Baikal a long time ago, so 15,000 plus years ago, and they were the people who originally had the story of the Great Bear and the three hunters
So
that were
where's
chasing
Lake
the great.
Baikal?
Lake Baikal's in Central Asia, in Russia right now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so there was a tribe there who were living on the shores of this lake, and half of them turned to the east, and they went and they lived in Beringia for a long time, like maybe 10,000 or 20,000 years. They were living in Beringia, which is land now sunken beneath the sea. But the Aleutian Islands are part of it that didn't sink. But then they left when the land was sinking, and they went down into the Americas, and they swarmed around there. And then you've got the natives, and of course, them they were struck by a comet they just found recently. It kind of blasted them back in technology for quite a bit, knocked out the Clovis people, but they bounced back and they became the various native tribes that you see around there.
Was
Now the
that the
other
sorry, was that the comet that supposedly struck about 12,000 years ago?
yeah,
Or
and
is
it
it?
caused the younger Dryas, and
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard about that whole theory with people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson.
yeah, so that's got a lot of confirmation. So three or four major papers confirming it have come through just in the past couple months. So it looks like
Oh,
he was
okay.
right on that.
Cool.
Yeah, so the comet, split up and it struck in multiple places for the Earth, but mostly across the Americas. So it burned down a lot of South America. One of the pieces of comet hit the ice sheet, and it sent these chunks of ice, like big ice cubes, but like a kilometer wide, flinging up into the air. And they went into outer space and then came down in like South Carolina and in Montana and places like that. And you could see the pattern where they smashed into the ground. And another piece hit in Greenland, and probably
Right.
a piece near to Turkey because the people there noticed something, and it caused that younger Dryas cooling phase.
And one of the correlations is that there were massive floods in those areas around that time period too, right?
Yeah, so you had a lot going on with that. So I think there was something happened with the St. Lawrence, and maybe I think I remember that correctly. And there were other things going on, possibly with the Black Sea, but it's hard to say.
Oh,
I haven't
okay.
read about the floods as recently, but there was a guy talking about them a few years back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's the people who turned in one direction. So it's the same people from the Lake Baikal region. Now the other half the tribe turned the other way, and they went out onto the Pontic steppe, and there they invented horse riding and wheeled carts, and they started to come into Europe. And it was almost like what happened when Europeans came to the Americas. They had disease ahead of them. Well, it looks like the trading routes that these Yamna people were doing throughout Asia might have brought in Black Death, because the Europeans at that time were kind of like the Stonehenge type people, and they had built themselves up to cities of 20 to 30,000. And then the archaeologists find plague pits. They all died of Black Death. And there were some remnants there who were still trying to hold on to the land and hold on to their culture a little bit. But then the Yamnaya swarmed in and killed them off. So it was very like the Victorians used to talk about this. So the Yamnaya, they used to call them the Aryans, but they had a lot of the details wrong. So now we call them the Yamnaya, and we realize that they didn't bring farming. The farming was already there, but they brought horse riding. But they did bring warfare and destruction. So, for instance, people who were looking at the Iberian Peninsula were able to figure out that these Yamnaya killed all the men in the Iberian Peninsula and took the women.
Oh, wow. That's a fascinating story. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, it's just all very recent. And then, of course, these are the same. So if you look at Northern Europeans, they're about 90% Yamnaya. And there was like
Oh,
yeah, and they came into England as well, and they wiped out the Stonehenge type people. Then English people are 90% Yamnaya as well. And then, of course, these people there crossed the ocean and took over North America to some extent. And so, in a way, it was almost like the Yamnaya were coming full circle because they're
oh,
meeting up with
wow.
the tribes who'd gone the other way at Lake Baikal. So there was an article in New Scientist, but it was like behind a paywall, so I didn't read it. But they were maybe being a bit hyperbolic, but they were calling the Yamnaya the most violent people ever known
Oh, wow. Sounds
because the
like
men.
I have some Yamnaya in me then, since I have Northern European and English heritage.
Yeah, you're probably the same as me then. So I'm like a mix of Scandinavian and Irish, Scottish, English, a little bit of French, stuff like that. So it's all that area with heavily Yamnaya.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and then as you get down south, they're only half Yamnaya because it looked like the Yamnaya killed the men down there, but they kept the women.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense then.
Yeah, and in the north, they were a bit more complete in their destruction, or maybe there's just less people there. I'm not sure, but in any case, there's not as much surviving from like the Stonehenge type people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, like that, and also related to the Younger Dryas event, like how much how much culture and monuments and all.
Well, even your voice cut out. Oh no. Okay, you're back, I think.
Oh, did I get cut out there for a
Yeah,
minute
a
again?
little bit cut out again. Okay, so you're probably asking about how much survived from before the glaciers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about that. So I would like to see some evidence. So I know that various people, including that author that you had mentioned earlier, they were talking about this theory. But from my point of view, I like their theory. It's interesting, but I think they have to come up with some evidence.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, like I was saying, I mean, it's really interesting to think about, um, like all this culture that might have been lost, like evidence of ancient civilizations and stuff like that, is the kind of theory that people like Graham Hancock talk about. But you're right that there's not really evidence of that, and it would be really interesting if there is, but that
Yeah, I
is
mean, he
just,
seems enthusiastic and he presents a little bit of circumstantial evidence, but for a claim like that, you have to present more hard evidence of some sort. Like
yeah,
you should find like an ancient town or something anyway.
yeah. I mean, what he often says about that is that all of that stuff would be so old that the evidence wouldn't exist anymore. But I
Well,
mean,
I don't know about that because they found, isn't that Turkish town is pretty old, right? Like, isn't that 10,000 years old?
yeah, the one that's like, I think it's like 12,000
Oh,
years old,
wow.
isn't it? Go
Okay.
back Tepe? Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
okay.
so.
Yeah, because it was from around the Younger Dryas time, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so that's pretty old. So I don't see, if that one can survive, then if there's one from before that, they should be able to find it also.
yeah. Ideally,
Yeah, I mean, I
that'd be
guess we have
really
to be
interesting.
patient a little bit. They can look around and eventually discover it.
Yeah, and it takes a long time for archaeologists to do that work too, right? Like, I think it's already been at least over a decade with Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, it's probably time for them to have found something. And that's a good area to search because they just found recently that farming was invented there. It wasn't brought from elsewhere, but in that Anatolia region, they found evidence that farming was actually invented.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so there's a few places where farming was invented, but now we know that Anatolia is one of them.
Oh, okay. Where the Yeah, I'd heard before that it was invented in many places. How many places do you think it was, or like what are
Well,
some of
okay,
the other
Papua
ones?
New Guinea is one.
Right.
They invented, I think, sugar cane there and what is it, yams or something like that. And then there was another one in Mesoamerica, at least one in Mesoamerica. There might have been two. And there's the one in Anatolia. There's the one down in Mesopotamia, but people don't know if that was the same. So some people were saying the Mesopotamian one might have been the first invention, and maybe they brought it up to Anatolia.
Oh,
But now they
okay.
found that no, it seemed like Anatolia was one for their own. So probably Mesopotamia was on its own too. Or maybe Mesopotamia got it from Egypt because they were really early as well. And it looks
Oh,
like the
okay.
Chinese had one as well where they invented rice growing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there may be some other ones. So it looks like, farming was a pretty popular idea. So
Yeah,
there was a few
yeah,
inventors over time.
yeah,
Yeah, a killer
exactly.
app.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I was just talking to my uncle recently. He has some interesting stories to tell. So
Yeah,
he knows a lot about, how, like, remember when the Americans had this serious problem in 2008, like a banking crash?
yeah, yeah,
And you know how the Canadian banks didn't crash?
yeah.
So we had some problems, but we didn't go down the way the Americans did. Well, he was telling me that he's responsible for the Canadians not having that crash.
How so?
Well, okay, so in Alberta, there was some credit unions and other banks who were seriously misbehaving. So they were doing this really shady stuff. And at the time, my uncle was working for them. And they said, "Hey, you should do this and this and this with the books." And he's like, "Oh no!" Like he said, that's not the way it's done. In fact, that sounds kind of illegal to me. And they're like, "Do it or you're fired." And he said, "Okay, well I'm fired then, I guess." But he like saved all his documents of them demanding he do this stuff, and he knew they'd get someone else to do it. And then he noticed, like, so he was fired. He found a new job at a different bank. And then a little bit later, he heard there was a royal commission or some sort of commission looking into this banking failures in Alberta because it was like they were doing that shady stuff with the real estate and it kind of crashed, like a bit of a mini crash. And they had they had this commission looking into it, and they were almost near the end. And they were saying, "Yeah, we didn't find out that a little bit of bad stuff was done, but not too much." And he was going, "What's this? Like they must have not been able to discover it." So he talked to the guy who was on the commission and said, "I used to work for this bank. They were really shady. I don't see why you're saying that nothing happened." So he said, here's all these documents. And so like the RCMP came to, like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came, and they were like talking to him and, gaining all this stuff, and they sent it over to the commissioner, and they reopened the commission and instead found the guy's massively guilty. And they fired the guy who was supposed to be regulating it. And there's a whole smash of new laws came in that really restricted what banks could do in terms of shady behavior.
Oh
And now the
wow.
banks were really angry because they saw the Americans and the Europeans were doing all this shady stuff, and they were so angry that they were putting, like, they would rent out the whole, they would get the whole front page of the newspaper, like Globe and Mail and stuff, and say, why can't Canadian banks do what the Americans and the Europeans are? Because they got restricted as a result of this commission. But then once the Europeans and Americans collapsed, they kind of shut up about that.
Oh wow. I had no idea about all that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so
It,
it's like a mini real estate crash kind of gave Canadians a taste of what happens if you don't properly regulate banks. And
right.
then as a result of that, they put in restrictions. And it wouldn't have happened if my uncle hadn't have, I guess in a way he ratted out the banks, but he was angry at them. They fired him and they're trying to force him to do illegal stuff.
Wow. That's really that's quite a thing. Holy shit.
Yeah, and
Like
then they gave him a little certificate. So
well, it's good that he did that. I mean, what would have happened otherwise, right?
yeah, I mean, still on the commission thing, he was like anonymous at the time. But I've seen his commission, and he said he didn't mind if I talked about what he'd done because enough time has passed and he's retired now. But before, like, other banks might not hire him if they knew he's the guy who
Right.
ratted out the criminal little sleaze.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, he tells me a lot of shady stuff about what goes on for banking in Canada, and a lot of like the political economy, corruption, and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, I bet. I
Yeah, it's
bet
pretty shady actually.
did you know did you know like well, I guess you said when was it that he retired?
Just a couple of years ago. So
Oh,
he was
okay.
working for a different bank, and then he was doing investments and stuff, and then he retired. Then he didn't care anymore if anyone knows his name. But I was
Oh,
telling
okay.
him he should come on a podcast and talk about, his experience in detail at some time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, like I wonder I mean, I bet people like that because you mentioned the political economy would have like some sort of inside knowledge of recent scandals that happened with Justin Trudeau that you and I have talked about a little bit, like the SNC
Yeah.
Lavalin affair
Or
and
even
things
like
like
here's an
that.
ongoing, should be a scandal, but it's not. So the feds are shutting down the development of Halifax.
Really?
Yeah, because what they don't want. So there's kind of like this Laurentian mafia. They're a bunch of really rich families who control a lot of stuff right around that sort of Quebec, Ontario region. And what they don't want is for Halifax to develop as a port. Because if you look at the Bedford Basin for Halifax, it's an amazing port. And you wonder, why doesn't Canada have a gigantic super terminal for the largest kind of container ships? They can come in there and there's tons of space and it's a really deep harbor, really good protection. They can unload really quickly. It's excellent. But Quebec and Ontario don't want that because they have a lot of the Laurentian mafia who control the business for Canada. They have a lot of like little ports and little facilities for smaller ships that come up the St. Lawrence, and they don't want to do anything that would take trade away from places like Montreal or other ones that are on that St. Lawrence area.
Wait,
So
who uh who are the Laurentian Mafia? I've never even
it's
heard of
like
them
the like
before.
the old money for that whole central Canada region. They kind of
Oh,
control
okay.
things for Canada, and they become very angry if anyone tries to do anything that is against our interests, even slightly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they're quite powerful. They run things. Trudeau's family is one of them. So
Oh,
that's
I
why
didn't
they
know that.
yeah, so that's why they always put the person in charge of Halifax Port is always some sort of ineffectual person. They're paid a lot of money to just sit there, and they never do anything. But what they should do is develop that port, but it's never going to happen. And even once when they discussed developing the port, they couldn't even get the federal government to send a letter saying we approve of this. So
Wow.
that's how much they're kind of like without trying. They don't want to appear to be shutting things down, but they're shutting things down.
Because it would take away their control.
Yeah, it would take away their little bit of. So they're getting a little bit of business. Let's call it like $10. They're getting by or 10 units of money by having this St. Lawrence Seaway thing open. But if they're worried that they might lose a few of that 10 in order to have something in Halifax worth maybe 100 units of money. So
That
it'd be
doesn't
really
even make
beneficial to
sense.
Canada to develop it, but they don't want that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a. It's almost like they would get a mosquito bite, so they don't want it, even though it'd be like huge benefit to Canada. They won't take one for the team, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They got that shut down. They have various ways of shutting it down. One of them is some sort of law they put in where any development that happens in Halifax has to also happen in St. John, New Brunswick, which is not like a feasible thing because St. John doesn't have anywhere near the harbor that Halifax does. So if you did proper understanding of what Canada should do to benefit Canada the most, you'd put all the money into massively developing the Halifax port.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they have little sneaky ways that they try to shut things down, and one of them is this equity thing between St. John, New Brunswick, and Halifax, and also they keep putting an ineffectual person in charge of the port. And when someone does propose a development, they can't even get a letter supporting it from the federal government, which of course anyone who's thinking of investing or working on that would go, oh, it looks like the feds don't even support it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
Oh,
like
wow.
political economy. Same thing's going on with the moving to oil. So the oil pipelines, a lot of that's going on as well. It's political economy. Like economics should have never changed their name to just economics. It used to be political economics
Oh,
because the
really?
politicians are involved in all of that.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, Irving is a little bit involved as well for the oil company. They
Yeah.
have some deals. They're doing something with accounting where they misstate they take their oil into the Caribbean and then they put a price on it, which is not a realistic price, but it helps them in a tax sense for avoiding taxes in Canada and ship it in from there. And they don't want that shut
Oh,
down. So they wouldn't want like Western Oil to come out because it would shut down the thing that they use as a little bit of a way to save on taxes. So it's like little things like that is all have to do with politics, right?
yeah. Oh, wow. That's interesting, but also sadly not surprising. I
Yeah.
was gonna ask you that too about the like what sort of things are going on with the oil pipelines. It sounds like that's some of the
Yeah,
shady shit that's going on.
it's shady stuff. I mean, also the Laurentian mafia type people, they have some oil facilities on the St. Lawrence Seaway that they wouldn't want to have made useless. I mean, even some relatives in the Trudeau family and stuff. So for like the Central Canadians are behaving just like as you'd expect humans would behave. They're looking out for their own interests above that of the country. So the
Yeah.
little bit of processing and stuff they do, they consider that really important. And last thing they want is for Alberta to be able to get its oil to market and get a proper price.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah,
you
because it's
mean
not beneficial to them.
so you
So
mean what my conservative friend said is actually true about how the federal government is trying to shut down some of the oil production in Alberta?
yeah, things like that are true. But the thing is, it's just true in general, so it's always true. So if you look at the history of any country, it's always like that. And sometimes you get such a big country that there's so many competing interests that they can't shut things down. But for Canada, we're kind of narrow and we're all squeezed up against this southern border. So it's easier to block things. So we got a lot of block development. If Canada just had someone in charge who wasn't associated with any particular area or politics and was just doing what was best for the country, we'd have a really high economic growth and a lot more jobs.
Does that ever really happen in politics?
Well, sometimes like China's so big and America's so big that it's hard for any one group. Like there's so many groups and it's so big that they can't shut things down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because imagine like the Mississippi, that whole basin there is so big. If someone was trying to stop someone from bringing in oil, you could just go around them.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. That makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, so sometimes it's harder, if you can't defend your region as much. But for Canada, it's easier to sort of break it up and defend it and block people because we're all squeezed along the south there. We're like a long thin
Yeah, yeah,
snake there.
yeah. If you get to the places like Nunavut in the Northwest Territories, it's really spread out and really sparsely populated up there.
Yeah, I mean there are some people who mean well, but it's hard. Like for instance, like my dad used to know a lot of people in politics around Ottawa. And there's one guy who was like, I think he was the mayor or deputy mayor or something like that. I can't remember the conversation exactly. But he was saying that there was swampy land near to Ottawa. And some developers said, we want to, put a whole bunch of houses here, thousands of houses. And the city of Ottawa looked into it and they discovered that actually it's really swampy land. And it'd be kind of hard to develop and it'd be annoying to have to put in like all the sewage and everything for that. It'd be kind of expensive. And also the way the land was situated, the cars coming and going from that would block up an area where it was really, really hard to get traffic going from out of this swampy area and into the regular traffic flow. Would have been a real problem for the city. So they said no to this proposal. And then this guy was telling me that the next day there were tons and tons of guys with, in suits that never seen before, just hanging around City Hall. And they were like going into rooms talking to people, right? And then like after a few days later, oh, actually it is approved. You can see it's just like money under the table, right? Pay to play.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty sleazy stuff. And for instance, my dad was involved in government to some extent, but he wasn't a sleazy guy. He just died recently. But he wasn't a sleazy guy at all. He didn't want to get involved in corruption. But it's difficult sometimes. Like once when he was younger, it was during the 80s, I think. He had a job where he was supposed to evaluate battle tanks for the Canadian Army and
Oh,
decide.
cool.
And there's one guy was out evaluating like the, I guess you could say the mechanics of it, and he was evaluating the electronics. And between the two of them, they decide what tank Canada was going to buy because we don't make our own tanks. You know, you could buy German or American or British or whatever it was, French. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I heard that from my friend in the Canadian military who's a heavy duty mechanic who works on things like tanks.
Yeah. So, well, the situation for him was he started to look at the tanks to see which was the best one to buy. And then a bunch of guys he knew from work said, "We wanted you to come down and drink beer at the Laurentian Club." He said, "Oh, the Laurentian Club, that's a club for politicians." They go, "Oh, don't worry about that. You'll like it. Come on, come on." So he goes and he sits down with them. And then like they invite in like a new guy. So there's a new guy he'd never seen before sitting at the table. And then one by one, everyone he knew from work like made an excuse. "Oh, got to get home to see the wife or whatever." They're all gone. And eventually he's sitting alone with this guy. He says, "Oh, I hear you're evaluating tanks for the Canadian Army." And my dad goes, "Oh, yeah, I am." He said, "Well, I have a deal for you. How about you find that my tank is best and I'll pay you $200,000 a year as a consultant." He said, "You don't have to show up to our company. We'll just say you're a consultant and $200,000 a year will appear in your account."
That's a good deal.
Yeah, so but it's corrupt though, so it's not. It
Yeah,
wouldn't be
yeah,
necessarily the tank for the Canadian Army. It'd be just saying whatever his tank was, which may well have been an inferior tank, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Now he's a very moral person, so he didn't go for that corruption. But he said most people were.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that that reminds me, I mean, obviously the American system and Canadian systems they work differently, but that reminds me of Lawrence Lessig's book Republic Lost, which everyone who's part of mixed mental arts will probably know about how the government is organized in such a way that if you're not doing that sort of thing, it's like you're behind. So like you almost have to an extent if you want to get anywhere. But I mean, obviously, like I said, that's a little bit different in Canada, but it's still like there's still a lot of corruption for sure.
Yeah, and even in Canada Space Agency, there was a little bit. So my dad, he recently died, so I sort of a little bit. He's a little bit on my mind of what he did during his career. But one of them is he was doing the wiring and working on Canada's first satellite, and he said there was a little bit of corruption going on there too. So there was like various people were vying to be the head of the department, and one guy lost out, and another guy became the head of the department and went ahead with the satellite. So then it was my dad's job to do the electronics for it. So he was working away on that. And he noticed that when he was trying to get transistors that he needed to put in the satellite, they kept coming in as like he heard a rumor that something was up, some little sleaze was going on. And he checked the transistors and he found out they were really old and defective. So he tried to talk to the guys and say, "Hey, like, give me good ones. These are old." And they go, "No, you get what you get." So he thought they were trying to sabotage the satellite by giving these crappy defective transistors. And it turned out the guy in charge of the warehouse where the transistors were coming from was a guy who was passed up to be the leader of the whole enterprise.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what he was trying to do, so my dad had to go to the head and say, "This guy's trying to sabotage the satellite so that you can fail. And then when you crash out, he'll become the head of the science department."
Holy
And they
shit.
looked into it and found out it was true. And they sent the guy up to some sort of weather station in the Arctic, got rid of him. But there's a little bit of internal fight to get rid of him, right? So he was hoping to sneak through these faulty transistors, and luckily the engineers had caught onto it, and they sort of brought the information up the chain of command.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Canada could have had a failed first satellite, but it would have been good from the point of view of the guy who was passed up for the promotion. And he would like
Yeah.
see the other guy go down in flames because he would have failed. And he's like, "Okay, now I'm the leader." Then he would make a successful satellite.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
you can see how
wow.
he put his own endeavors above that of the country.
Yeah. Yeah. But it sounds like that's unfortunately a fairly rare thing.
Yeah, well, it's not as rare as it should be. I mean, that's how didn't the Russians fail in their part of the reason they failed in their moonshot was that there was too much infighting among the engine makers. the rocket engine makers. I remember reading about that somewhere.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
battling for supremacy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they couldn't agree on who would make the engine, and then they ended up fighting it out. Yeah, it's funny.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
human element, right? That's why I like to put the political economy in the economy, because the politics of it, the politics of the job, the politics in general, the country, it's all involved.
Yeah, and I mean, like, even it seems like often what what theories economists focus on are sort of like determined by their political persuasion too. Like if you think of a few examples, like if you look at economics, like I don't know, like welfare or housing prices. If you're a sociologist, for example, you might look at income distributions among different classes or something like that, and you're going to have different preconceptions about what the reasons might be behind class differences in terms of like income and stuff like that, de
Mhm.
depending on how you see it.
Well, I think probably Weinstein is right about this, where he was saying we're going to have to be very capitalist and very socialist at the same time, plus probably something else.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting what he says about that. That um, for I think it's something like in that video I was watching the other day of him, that in order for capitalism to continue, you're going to have to use some technology, even though technology is sort of killing capitalism in the old way that we understand it. So it's going to have to be sort of a combination of that and then some aspects of socialism, because the changes that are being made right now unintentionally are going to leave some people out. And he was talking too about how some of these people are inadvertently developing tools that can harm people but can also benefit people as well. So if they try to deliberately target those things instead, then that could end up being a much better result.
Yeah, and he was talking about also the ones that are loops. Once you can get in and get an algorithm doing something, they can remove the human workers in that area.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I mean, one of my friends actually made a pretty good fortune with that sort of thing. So I was talking to him about a week ago. He had to fly off to Rome just now, but he started iStock Photo, and
Oh
then
yeah.
yeah, and then sold it to Getty Images. So it used to be that stock photography was done by, like, you get a box or a binder of photos sent to you, you look through them, you're sending back and forth in the mail, decide on something and pay for it. But his idea was that this should all be done over the internet. And so he started iStock Photo, doing this over the internet. And at first it was massively unprofitable. So he was mostly making a living just sort of playing drums in a band like in Calgary. And
Oh, that's a fun way to make a living.
yeah, and then he kept this going on the side because he kind of felt bad, where he told all these photographers, "Put your photos with me. I'll put them on the internet. We'll make some money." And it turned out it wasn't making any money. But he kind of felt bad about it, so he kept running anyway, just a hobby in his spare time. And then it transpired that the reason it wasn't making money is too many people thought of that idea at the same time. So there were dozens of
Oh,
companies. They all thought, okay, the internet's good enough now. We can send photos over the internet. They all were trying it, but they all got disappointed because there was no money. So they all shut down their companies and they moved and did something else. And then once they all shut down their companies, and my buddy kept running his company, then all the business came to him, and then suddenly it was profitable. And then people heard the name. They're like, "Oh, iStock Photo." So then all the business poured into him, and he captured it all.
oh wow, that's like really lucky timing for him.
Yeah. So then all of a sudden, he had this massively valuable company. Then he sold it for 50 million or something.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he moved to Hollywood and he was partying.
Yeah, I bet, man.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me of one of the other topics that we were going to talk about, how some billionaires who
Oh
had
yeah.
some
I've
drug
met lots of them.
problems.
Yeah, I've met
Yeah.
lots of billionaires and kind of interesting people like that. I kind of collect interesting people. If I meet interesting people,
Yeah,
touch with
sounds
them.
that way.
And as a result, there's certain billionaires that sort of float around. But I think for the billionaires, I wouldn't really want to be a billionaire. I don't think they have the best life. I say that people with the best life, people between 5 and 10 million, is probably the best.
Yeah? Why that amount?
Because you don't have so much money that it's a hassle, right? Like the billionaires I know, they're always like I don't want to name names or anything about these billionaires. Sometimes they're getting up to a little bit too much fun, and so am I. But they have a situation where people can find them online and know that they're billionaires. They have like a lot of really predatory women after them. Not so good. They're
Oh,
really suspicious, and a lot of people they meet are just trying to somehow get some sort of money out of them, or think they're good for some sort of business contact, like more than a friend and stuff. It's
right,
it's
right.
kind of tough that way. Like
Yeah,
yeah, and then sometimes they drink too much as a result and stuff. Like, did you ever watch that documentary about that DJ who was like mega rich, one of the famous like Avicii or something like that?
I don't think so.
Okay, he was like a really famous and extremely rich DJ, but then eventually he drunk himself to death. He became disappointed with life. I mean, there's always that danger. A lot
Yeah,
of the billionaires that I know, they kind of drink heavily, and they're they have some trouble with their personality because there's too many nasty people around them and stuff. It's better to be the undercover person that has like 5 to 10 million.
yeah, like the virtue of being anonymous, right?
Yeah, yeah, because fame
Yeah,
is almost like pollution.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've thought
you get
about
too
that
famous.
before too. Like if you're, I was thinking about this the other day actually. Like if you're really famous, like I feel like I would be worried about, first of all, people hacking all of the online stuff that I do all the time, and people, like you were saying, being interested in you or pretending to be interested in you, but not necessarily actually genuinely being interested in you, just being interested in you because you're famous or because you're rich or
Yeah,
both or
they're
something
hoping to
like that.
benefit somehow from that.
Yeah,
They're thinking there'll be more girls around, or there'll be more drugs, or there'll be more booze,
yeah,
whatever they think, or more money. Yeah, so it gets kind of nasty like that. But
yeah.
I did ask, like, some of my billionaire friends know a lot of other interesting people. So I was asking, like, one of them is quite good friends with the Clintons, and also with there's some of these like other mega rich guys like Warren Buffett and people like that. So I was asking, oh, you're friends with the Clintons. So I said, okay, is Hillary really corrupt the way they say on the news? And he was going, yeah, kind of, but she kind of has to be. But then he's saying, but Trump is too, right?
Right,
So I
right.
wasn't surprised to hear that. But yeah, but it shows that even the people who are like family friends of her think that she's a bit corrupt.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I mean,
Yeah, it's a shady business, trying to be become the leader that way.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's funny that people think that Trump is immune to corruption or something like that, or that he's not corrupt because he was more independently funded. And I mean,
Yeah,
like like one thing that we found out, for example, with the Mueller report, is that the whole Russian collusion thing was probably just bullshit from the beginning, seemingly. But that doesn't mean that he's like that doesn't mean that he's suddenly not a shady person or anything like that.
yeah. Well, Trump's problem was that New York itself is very shady, and
Yeah,
especially real estate in New York is really shady. And then he had all these Eastern European wives and girlfriends. So when he went over there, it'd be the same as like some of my friends who are relatively wealthy who go to Eastern Europe. They kind of link up with these oligarchs and people like that who are the important people there. And in Eastern Europe, it's very gangsterish. So if you're someone who has any kind of money, you're probably a gangster. Like, for instance, one of my friends that I'm going to meet in Vancouver in 2 days, he is married to a Ukrainian girl. And she's from like that kind of party crowd that they used to hang out with all the politicians and the rich businessmen and stuff. And not that she has much money herself, but she was in that crowd. And so when they go out as a couple and they're meeting like other Ukrainian guys who are businessmen there, she would say to my friend, like, be careful that you never ask anyone what they do for a living because it's all shady.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
all gangsterism, right? It's all, you know, what you'd expect, right, for Eastern Europe. So if Trump's doing business with these people, which he kind of is, because they're the families of his wives and girlfriends, there's automatically a shady connection there. And anyway, New York shady anyway. So of course, all this stuff is going on. But
yeah,
Hillary's not above that either, because she was like involved in the South in law and all that, and law and politics, like a lawyer
yeah,
going into politics. I mean, that's really shady also.
yeah, yeah. And there's that story too about how when she was a lawyer, she got a guy off of all acquitted of all of his charges or something like that, or found not guilty, um, who was a I think he was a rapist or a pedophile or something like that. And and then there's footage of her laughing about the state of the justice system after that happened, or
Oh,
something like
wow.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, hardcore. But I guess you get pretty cynical if you're involved in politics or law.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, yeah, I don't know. It's all pretty disappointing sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
I mean,
I would,
and I mean, like, I wouldn't want to get. That's why I wouldn't want to get involved in that sort of thing. Sounds like a fucking pain in the ass to be a politician. I mean, they
it's also
definitely have
sleazy.
a
I mean, you have
hard
to spend
job.
4 hours a day on the phone just trying to phone rich people to get their money,
Yeah,
and they're all asking you for
exactly,
something.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's already it's too sleazy. I couldn't do it either.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but anyway, I'm not sure how to fix that problem. That's a big problem because
Oh, yeah, yeah. To
because
say the least. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, people like money and they like power, and there you go. It's a big mess of it.
Yeah, exactly. And like you get pulled in all sorts of different directions simultaneously, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I was just down in California recently. I was visiting. There's an interesting friend that I know, and he used to be like he was put in an orphanage by his family, not because they didn't have enough money, but just because they didn't want to, pay money to feed his brothers and his sister. So they just stuck them all in an orphanage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was really like quite nasty in the orphanage. It was all full of all these delinquents and stuff. So he was tried to get out of there. So he ended up he didn't speak very good English, but he managed to like finagle a way where he could appear on a test that he had a good enough English score. Maybe he almost did, but he was able to get in the Marines with a few test scores where he worked really hard and he got in there. They sent him out to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. But he was so young, he's just 17, he's just like casualty replacement. So, he was in the rear with the gear. But then when he came back, he, out of the back of his car, just sleeping in his car and driving around, he managed to raise money and start a stem cell company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then he ran that for a while. So he had like when I went down to visit him, he had a whole bunch of people who were experts in stem cells and stuff that I got to talk to, and some lawyers that he knew that were involved in defending against lawsuits because California is a very litigious culture.
Yeah.
But he was also introducing me to his Afghan friends and talking about his Afghan experience. So he's good friends with one of the wealthiest men in Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me about that too.
Yeah, and he met this guy in a weird way. So after he shut down his stem cell company eventually was shut down because they were doing like research for the benefit of mankind, and so they could only go as long as the billionaires who were funding it wanted to continue funding it, and they did to a certain extent. So something was accomplished, and it probably helped out toward where we are now with stem cells. But after a while, they ran out of patients for paying more, and shut down after 10 years. But then he went traveling, and he ended up wanting to sell green cards. So in the US, you can make some sort of a situation where if someone invests some money in a company, they can get a green card. So he sort of had the knowledge of how to use this channel to get a green card. And he took the course and knew how to do it. But then they said, okay, now choose your territory. And he was looking around the world and it was all taken except for Afghanistan.
Oh,
And
wow.
he's like, oh, no one's there selling green cards. He goes, no, everyone's afraid to go. He said, okay, I'll go. So we flew out to Kabul, and then he advertised on Facebook like, hey, are you an Afghan who has a lot of money you could invest? Because if you want to invest money in America, you can get an American green card. So he put this out like Facebook advertising and stuff. And then he was staying in this one hotel. And then he started getting like some calls from a few guys who were interested, but plus also like a call from guys who sounded very threatening. And he was like, oh, damn, I better get out of here. So he moved to the hotel across the street. And then, boom, the one he was in, it was exploded.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it blew up real good. So then he's like, whoa, wow, glad I wasn't there. And they did an attack on it with rifles as well, I think. But he did get
Wow.
some Afghan contacts as a result of his advertising. And one of them was a guy who was a young guy. He's got tens of millions of dollars. He's quite successful. He runs a really big construction company. And he made his start by supplying things for American bases in Afghanistan.
Oh,
And then now he's up to doing like transmission lines and all kinds of things. So he's quite well connected now in the Afghan government.
oh, okay.
Yeah. So my buddy had just flown over to go to a wedding there in Afghanistan recently, and they were going to have a meeting with the president. Now it turned out they didn't get this meeting because the president had come in to speak at the same wedding, and they were going to talk to him right afterward. But then there was some young guy who was at the wedding, ran forward and was saying, my father's in prison. You've got to let him out. And like the security people had to come and try to push him back. And then it was kind of a big kerfuffle as a result. So, everything got kind of delayed. And they didn't end up meeting the president for that particular time. But to make them feel better, he said, "Oh, you guys can go out grenade fishing here. I'll send like an army unit to guard you, and you can go and grenade fish." So they
Right.
were going and doing that. So
Yeah,
that
that's
was
what you were telling me about. So did you do that too? Or
no, I didn't go along with it, but I'm invited.
oh, okay. Are you
So
going
so
to?
yeah, I'm going to go out to Afghanistan and do it next opportunity. So I was invited to go to Herat and show me that they could send like an army unit to bring me down to the Minaret of Jam. Because when I was there in 2008, I couldn't go because it was too expensive. Because the Afghans said for the Minaret of Jam, they said you're gonna have to spend $2,000 to go there because we want
Oh,
we want you to hire like armored car and a certain number of troops to go down because it was under Taliban controlled.
oh,
So I
okay.
didn't end up seeing the Minaret of Jam. I saw the Central Mountains and I saw like I was near like a suicide bomber, so I heard like I could feel the shockwave from the suicide bomber pass through me.
Oh, wow.
Interesting experience. And I went out to see the Bamiyan Buddhas that were exploded by the Taliban. I hung out there for a bit, so
Oh,
that was
wow.
pretty fun. And I took a few of those death roads, but they said it was a 30% chance the Taliban will cut off your head if you take the road with a public bus. And I did a couple
Oh,
of those. They didn't catch me, but that's because there was public buses. Whereas for Minaret of Jam, there was no public bus, so I would have had to hire a car and soldiers.
oh, oh, wow.
Yeah.
How much would that have cost?
Well, they were asking $2,000 for it, and I thought, no, I can't spend so much money just to see an ancient minaret. And
Right.
luckily, it was the right choice because now I'll get a chance to do it for free. And I'll get to talk to some of these Afghan guys because I was giving them a little bit of advice on urban development because the president was saying that he wanted to use the Singapore model for urban development in Afghanistan. And when I heard this, like my buddy from California said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "No, I don't think it'll work because Singapore is a very different situation than Afghanistan. They have like law-abiding, orderly people, relatively flat land. The report, they can do things like high-speed trains and subways or whatever they want to do. They can do that. Afghanistan is very different. So I tried to press upon the president that he should instead use the Cartagena model or maybe the favela model from Brazil because they have a very similar situation. So in Cartagena in Colombia, they had like extremely mountainous terrain, full of drug lords who were battling constantly, extremely violent tons of murders. And that's a situation where they developed a plan to sort of get the drug lords to agree to allow them to peacefully implement certain transport things like public escalators and tramways that are like hanging from lines.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember you telling me about this a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that's much more, it makes a lot more sense for Afghanistan because it's very mountainous there,
Yeah.
especially around
Yeah.
Kabul stuff. And they have a lot of drug lord problems and warlord problems and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I remember you telling me that that makes more sense due to the mountainous terrain and the problems with drug lords and all that kind of stuff that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I have a
Yeah.
friend who's like an operator. So he was a Swedish special forces, but he would,
Oh, cool.
yeah, he was working in Afghanistan. So he was guarding General Dostum for a while. So he was living with him for months. Actually, I was running a story by him. So, one time when I was in Toronto, I was giving a speech and lecture about a book I'd written. And there was a woman named Carol Off sitting next to me. She's quite a well known Canadian journalist for CBC, I think. And she was giving a talk about how in Afghanistan, General Dostum is a violator of human rights and that he was involved in an election and he went up to the person that was opposing him in the election and like shoved a beer bottle up his ass. And yeah, and then I heard her say this, and I'm like, that doesn't sound very realistic, right? So I talked to my friend who was living with General Dostum, and I have another friend who knows General Dostum quite well as like a close friend. And I said, "What's this about?" So I hear this Canadian journalist is saying that Dostum was shoving a beer bottle up some opponent's ass in an election, and they were laughing about that, and they said, "No, that's not true." And I said, "Well, where would she have got that story?" And they told me it was probably I forget now if it was a CIA or a State Department plant. So they were describing to me that General Dostum, the Americans have mixed feelings toward him. So I forget which it was, but either the CIA or the State Department likes him, and the other one doesn't like him. So whichever one who doesn't like him, they decided to plant a story to hurt his election chances. and they said they made up that bogus story. He actually wasn't doing that. So I guess they decided that naive woman, like elderly woman from Toronto, was probably the perfect person to make a bullshit story, like to plant it and have it go into the news from. Yeah, so it's an example of fake news, but it comes through counterintelligence.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. But my buddy who was there guarding Dostum, he was saying that he was disappointed to hear they were still grenade fishing. So he's like an anti-grenade fishing type of guy. He thinks it's bad for the
Okay.
environment. I can kind of
What?
understand because you're killing awful lot of fish, right? I mean, it sounds fun. I know a lot of people used to do it, but I don't know. I mean, you're killing like a big part of the lake full of fish with these grenades, right?
Yeah, that does seem kind of reckless, I would say.
Yeah, but if I get an opportunity to do it, when in Rome, right? I'll
Yeah.
go and give it a try.
I mean, just
But
to have that experience, right?
yeah, it's probably worth it. But if they were like going crazy grenading the whole lake, I might have to not fling a grenade. But I'll see
Yeah.
how it goes. It'll be an interesting experience, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I met some of the government guys last time I was there in 2008. Because at the time I had a girlfriend who worked for the UN, and we flew into Afghanistan from Dushanbe, and it was
Where's
pretty
that?
funny. She had Dushanbe in Tajikistan, so we
Oh,
we
okay.
flew to Dushanbe, and then we flew a bit into Afghanistan and crossed over from there
Oh, okay.
and got up to Kabul. And because she was UN, she got really good treatment. So I just kind of like shared her hotel rooms that she was getting for free and all this. It was pretty good. And
Oh,
actually, she
okay.
had tons of booze. Like when we were coming in there, she had like a suitcase and it was really heavy. And I was just carrying it. We went through customs and everything else. Then when we got into Kabul, she opened up her suitcase and it was full of like vodka and Armenian cognac. And I was like, hey, we're not supposed to have this much alcohol, and you're not even supposed to have alcohol in Afghanistan, really. She said, yeah, but I'm UN passport. They can't search me, right? And I said, well, even we can't, we can drink a lot, but, we can't drink a whole suitcase full of booze. She goes, it's not only for us, like it's going to be party in our room every time, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we got to meet tons of Afghans because they all come up for the party. And I got to meet the minister for preventing corruption and like a whole bunch of other people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, some
Oh,
mayors and stuff like that. They're all hard drinkers. They love to party, but their
yeah.
partying is a little bit hardcore from my point of view. Like a lot of weed, which you might like, but they've also got like a lot of hookers and stuff like that. It's not really my bag.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, some people are more okay with that. They're kind of nasty looking too. I mean, not that I would be into them, even if they're not nasty. I'm sort of like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure what your morals on the matter is, but
On
I see some of these.
prostitution?
Yeah.
I'm very pro prostitution.
Are you very okay? Well, you
Yeah.
might be right in there. You might be a better fit than me for.
Depends on what we're talking about, though. I have no idea what that situation's like.
Yeah, I don't know either. So my buddy was telling me the situation for like some of the parties. There was a lot of these like Uzbek hookers or like Afghan hookers that they got there, and he was saying
Yeah.
it's pretty nasty. But
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't want to get involved with any shady shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty funny. He said he had to pretend to go with one because like a lot of the Afghans were saying, "You must be CIA, like you're
Oh.
already drinking alcohol, and how come you're never going with the women? Like we hired women for everyone, and you're never taking them in the back room." So finally, he said he had to like take a woman in the back room, but then he just sat there on the bed and they chatted a bit. Then they
Oh,
came
yeah.
back out.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good way to get out of that.
Yeah, because he doesn't really want STDs or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's part of their culture. Like I think you heard they had a lot of, the Afghans have they have one thing that you'd read in the Quran, but the old-fashioned Afghan culture is not very Muslim actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're really into opium, weed, hookers, stuff like that. So
Opium too, hey?
yeah, yeah, they like that stuff.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they had that from age old. Like things are not. It's more like that renegade history idea. Like
Yeah, yeah.
Afghanistan is very much renegade history at the moment. Like people
Oh.
imagine that it's extremely pure Islam area, but it's not really the case.
Oh, sounds like maybe Thaddeus Russell should go there.
Yeah, maybe you should. The people there are. It's almost like the Wild West. Like my buddy was recording his friend doing a little talk about a cotton factory that he built there, and he was trying to edit it afterward, but it was very careful editing because there were so many armed guards around there, including guys who like had killed like 85 people, like this kind of thing. Really quite monstrous killers, like very skilled at their job. But they kept showing up in the film, and he's trying to make it look like a regular factory tour film, like to get investors interested. So last thing he'd want is like for the camera to stray a little bit, and like a guy bristling with guns walks into it by mistake. So he was when I was in California, he's busy chopping out all that stuff. Try to make a more normal looking video.
Oh, sorry, you got cut off for like 10
Oh,
seconds there for me.
oh, okay, yeah. So my buddy was editing a video that he taken of his friend who does a lot of construction work and is one of the wealthier Afghan guys, and he was doing a little mini video of his cotton factory to try to get investors. But he had so many armed guards around him, including guys who had like 85 kills to their name and stuff like that. Some quite dangerous guys.
Oh, wow.
And the editing was to cut these guys out because he was trying to make it look like a regular sort of factory tour. So you didn't want like when the camera strayed a little bit, it would show like all these guys bristling with weapons standing there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he was editing all that out, which is kind of a weird thing to be doing, right? We're sitting around in his room, and he's like editing, and oh no, there's that guy. There's so many guys with weapons, he had to edit them all out of the video.
Oh,
Just
wow.
yeah, I really like kind of fun, random stuff like that. That's why I like to meet interesting people from around the world, and especially if they have kind of like strange stories, and
Yeah.
yeah, travel along with them, or try to entice them to come on travels that I'm doing, and then see how it all works out. It's all a big adventure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to approach it, man.
It's good fun.
Yeah.
Okay, have we got through most things so
Yeah.
far, or we still have
Only
something?
the only thing we were going to talk about that we didn't, but we can leave that until next time if you want to, is what you were telling me before about Arab history. And I don't remember exactly what the details were, but it was something about you might have said it was the Kurds or something like that, and how there's this common notion where um, some Arabs think that they've been persecuted by the Kurds, but it was they persecuted the Kurds before they did so, or something like that. I don't even remember if it was the Kurds for
Oh, okay, I
sure.
might
But
have to. So I've read a lot about Arab history, but I'm not sure specifically which one you're talking about. I mean, something
yeah.
that's come out recently was a talk about how the Byzantine Empire was severely weakened by drought and food failure. So you
Oh.
can find from archaeology that a lot of their towns seem to have diminished in importance, and it seemed like a lot of the garbage collection had been canceled for some of the frontier towns. So it showed they were suffering economically, and this was just
Oh.
before the Arab attack that overran them.
Oh. Oh. Okay. So
Yeah,
they
so the
were
Byzantines used to
already.
be, yeah,
So,
they used to be quite important, and then they were sort of weakened by that time. Usually, it is when empires fall. It's usually they're not at their height. So for the Byzantine Empire, when the Arabs were able to take over so quickly, they were extremely weak at the time. So they had a lot of famine, a lot of problems, and also I read a book earlier saying that disease had come up from Egypt and it spread
right.
through and caused a lot of damage as well.
Right.
And
Yeah.
this is probably part of the social disruption that caused the Arabs to rise up and make a different religion, which is kind of like a mix between Christian and Greek and Persian and Jewish. Like a lot of these ideas came together.
Oh. Oh. Okay. Is
Yeah,
that
for religions, they're not very like when a new religion comes along, it's always the religion you expect. There's not a lot new happens with religion that way. It always makes geopolitical sense. And like, for instance, if you look at Christians, so you can see where the first countries to become Christian were those ones like Georgia, like in around that area, or Armenia. And you think, okay, what's their geopolitical situation at the time where they became Christian? Well, okay, on one side you have Greeks who worship virgin mothers. So you've got that on one side of them. Now on the other side, you've got angel worshippers from the Persians. And now down below them, they've got Jewish people. So now what do they do for the make of a new religion? I mean, it's not just a random religion. They don't just say, okay, we're Aztecs or something. They make something that's a mix of uh, virgin goddesses with like sons who were gods. They take that from the Greeks. They take a lot of the Jewish stuff, tack that in there, and they add in the angels as well. and then you get Christianity, right?
Oh, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because what you want to do if you're a little country, like your little country like Georgia or Armenia, going like hiding out, and you got these big empires, you want to be able to say to Greeks like, oh, we want to kill you. Oh, hey, don't kill us. Like we're a bit like you. We also have virgin mothers with goddess sons. Oh, okay. And then if the Persians are getting angry, you can say, well, come on, we're a little bit like you. We also worship angels. And then if the Jews are becoming aggressive, you're like, hey, well, we have a lot of similarities with you guys, right? So you want to kind of take a little bit from each. And I mean, the Sikhs did the same thing, right? If you look at they kind of made a mix between Islam and Hindu, something,
Okay.
in between the two of them. And they were kind of sandwiched between Islamic armies and Hindu armies.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know that much about the Sikhs.
Yeah, I know a little bit about them. I've seen some of their temples and read some of their stuff. They're quite a clever religion. But in the geopolitical sense, they weren't a random religion either. They were, once again, they're trying to split the difference between enemies. Religions are often geopolitical that way. But if you
Yeah,
get down
that's
to the,
interesting.
yeah, if you get down to the philosophy, though, there's a lot of quite deep thinkers who try to work on the religious philosophy. But a lot of the dogma is geopolitical.
Yeah. Yeah, and like one thing that Robert Sapolsky talks about in terms of the Abrahamic monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is the I think one of the things he talks about is, like, for example, it being wrong to eat the flesh of pigs, especially in Islam, could have been due to the fact that during the climate, especially during that time, made it so that if you ate pig flesh, you'd be more susceptible to certain diseases because pigs could much more easily catch diseases than other types of animals. So it made
Yeah.
sense to put that into like biblical law, basically.
Yeah, and that's a subset of Marvin Harris's line of thinking with his cows, pigs, boars, and witches, where he's talking
Yeah.
raising pigs is very tempting in areas with that climate. But and remember, it was a changing climate, so it used to be more possible to raise pigs. And if you look back, even in old Jewish sites, there's pig bones. But as you get, as the Jewish religion began to coalesce, the climate was changing and it was becoming much drier. And it was eventually had a situation where it's tempting to raise pigs because they're tasty, but it was really bad for the environment. And it was also socially bad because the pigs were doing, like if you tried to provide a situation that was okay for pigs, you have to be giving them a lot of water and a lot of human type food. So the poorer people in your society are quite angry that you're wasting food on these pigs instead of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
that
if you
makes
don't do
sense.
that, then of course the pigs are not in a good environment. So they're going to be very diseased. So if you're not providing, if you're trying to make them just live in a desert environment, they can't do it very well. And they're going to have a lot of disease.
Right. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So raising pigs is just a bad idea for that area. And
Right.
so they make this kind of quasi-religious or religious ban, gradually, comes into play. And
Yeah.
they found other areas with a similar ecosystem around the world. They had a similar ban upon pigs. Now, for the
Yeah.
Egyptians, they couldn't quite do it because you needed pigs to sow the seeds in the mud when you're trying to replant after the Nile floods. So what they did
Oh.
instead is they made the pig farmers were like a lower caste. But you can see they would have liked to ban them, but they needed them for the sowing the seeds because they can trample everywhere and trample the seeds into the mud. So they ended up having a like more
Oh.
intermediate level of banning.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's fun stuff. I think you've read some of the Marvin Harris books
Yeah.
in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah. Been a while though. I should reread them.
Yeah, I reread them every few years. I think I might
Yeah.
have. Yeah, it's like with books, you can get a lot out of them by going through again. But I've kind of maxed out
Especially,
on some of my good books here. Like there's one about the secret life of trees, which is quite interesting.
yeah.
Just
I've never heard of
rereading.
that one.
Yeah, it's a recent one, some German guy. But he's talking about all the stuff going on with forests. He's talking about beech trees,
Oh, okay.
which are like a relative of oak, but they can actually outcompete oak. And it's quite amazing actually the way they all fit together as a kind of almost like a super organism, and the way they communicate with each other, and they help out their kids, and
Oh.
they help their kids to grow slowly by shading them, because if they grow too fast they won't live long. There's all these little strange things going on that like the tree's doing as a parent to take care of its kids.
That's interesting.
And there's other little alliances between the trees that they help, even the different species help each other out. And there's like fungus that connects them, almost like an internet of fungus, almost like in an Avatar movie.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, so they got that going on as well. Yeah, a whole bunch of other fun stuff, like the way the beech trees are made, that when the rain falls on them, they channel the water toward the trunk, and then it comes down the trunk, and they can store up the water for later use.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of clever stuff going on. And he was going into detail about which tree species can survive best in which situations and how long they live and what their life cycle is like.
Oh, that's really interesting. I should read that book.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. Yeah, it's quite
Yeah,
fascinating.
cool.
Mhm. Okay, well, I guess I better go and have dinner. I've been kind of delaying it.
Okay.
Rest of
Well,
the
this was
family.
great conversation, man. Thanks
Yeah, it's
for,
been great fun.
yeah, thanks for talking again. We should do this more often. I know it's been a long time since the first one. Last time
Yeah.
I think you were in the Ukraine when we were talking.
Yeah, I was in the Ukraine on a different, I think on that old laptop. I'm not sure
Yeah,
how that worked out.
yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for talking, man. And
Yeah,
there's
it's been a
always
really fun conversation. Okay.
yeah, yeah, thanks, man. And yeah, you always have interesting stories to tell for sure. So
Well,
yeah,
good.
I'll say all the stuff I like to say at the end of my podcast here, and then you can give any last words or plugs or anything like that. So thanks everyone so much for watching another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you found this as interesting as I did. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. Most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. And I also forgot, thanks to all of you who like and share this video, and especially to those of you who subscribe to my channel and to those of you who contribute to me on Patreon. I really appreciate that. And I'll put the link for my Patreon page in the description for this video, like I always do. Yeah, so
Okay, excellent. Well,
any,
I'll try to gather up some more stories and
sure.
yeah, talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Okay, bye bye, Andrew.
Okay, see ya.